So one of the things we talked about is if your agent is out there messing up, when do you get sued? Well, most of the time your agent is working on your behalf and they are within the scope of their responsibility. It's your responsibility, the principal, to protect them. So now sometimes we see that put back on them, like you might hire someone as a contract driving service and you might say you have to have insurance because if you have an auto accident, we don't want to get sued. We want to be secondary, so we want to make sure that you have primary insurance so that your insurance kicks in before ours do. But that is to overcome the common law presumption that if they're on your bidding, then you're responsible for protecting them. So that's why it's a little bit different. We mentioned this before, is respondeat superior. It basically means the boss pays for everything. Anything your employees do or your agents do, it's your responsibility as the supervisor, as the owner. Vicarious liability. You can be responsible for punitive damages. And a lot of times this is, and we're going to see wrongful termination in a few minutes in the employment chapter, but we also have wrongful hiring. So the idea is if you hire someone, you don't check them out, and for instance, you're Stanley Steamer and you're sending people out to work in people's homes, and the person's a pedophile or a sexual predator, and you have not determined that before you sent them out, then the law says it's your responsibility that you acted carelessly, and we impute that liability to you, even though obviously the perpetrator is the one who should be responsible. But again, what are we looking for? Looking for that deep pocket. We're looking for the person who's got the assets and the insurance, because the individual a lot of times doesn't have it, especially if they're out there, working for a little over minimum wage, cleaning people's carpet. Very unlikely that there's any resources there that can be recovered. And then the punitive damages are to say, yeah, we're going to make you pay something extra so that you and the other businesses aware of the situation are aware of the fact that they need to be more careful in hiring. So probably hiring liability is one of the big ones out there today. So how do you get hooked on this? Well, reckless hiring is number 2. Number 1 is a very rare instance where you actually authorize the commission of the tort. That doesn't happen too often. And however, the employee is the manager. So if the manager hauls off and does something, that makes the company more liable because the person's at a higher level in the organization. And then number 4 is similar to number 1. That's ratified tortious conduct. So after the employee does it, maybe you've had a customer who's been a real pain, and so the employee punches the customer out, and you say, oh yeah, that guy really deserved a beating. Well, that's probably not going to happen, at least not on the record, but if you do that, you've ratified that bad conduct and inappropriate conduct. Keep in mind that for the principal to be responsible, the person needs to be acting in their scope of employment. And this is where this tortious act gets a little interesting. So for instance, you have an air conditioning service company and people are out there during the daytime working for you, doing different calls, and at lunchtime your service person says, yeah, I got an extra hour for lunch. I think I'll stop by the strip club and have a few brews and party a little bit till I get another call to go to another call this afternoon. Well, unfortunately for the employer, shortly after he is imbibed through lunch, he gets a call and he said, yeah, you need to go service the air conditioner down the street. And he gets in the company van and runs out in the intersection and plows into a station wagon full of kids. This is not an imaginary event. It really did happen. Almost exactly the way I said it happened. The accident was at 34th and 290 underneath the freeway. A person came out of a strip club on the corner of southeast corner of 290 and 34th Street, underpass there. And very sad circumstance. The mother driving the car and the child closest to her badly hurt in the accident. And so not going to be a good day for that company. Again, he's in the company vehicle. He was leaving in order to go on another call. He may have been on a detour while he was at lunch, but the question is did they do a thorough check Was this the first time that something like this happened to this guy? Did they check out his whole driving record and so forth? So this is why, again, while we all have insurance, but also why it becomes so necessary to be careful in what we do. Exception, frolic and detour. Frolic and detour is a cliche, meaning the person's not on company business at that time, but this is very carefully limited to where the person really has to be off the reservation and in order for it not to be part of the business. As if, for instance, your office manager runs over to the bank at lunchtime and makes a deposit for the business. On her way out the door, several employees said, oh, you know, there's a fast food place across the street, would you mind? And then the next thing you know, they've got 3 people out there giving her $10 bills, pick up lunch across the street while she's at the bank. Okay, as she comes out of the fast food place, she's involved in a big accident. Most likely, that will not be considered frolic and detour because it's so close to what she was doing. Now, on the other hand, if it's a more elaborate scenario and she drives to Richmond, Texas, because, you know, it's barbecue day or whatever, or chili cook-off day as it was here on our campus, then you might be able to say it's so removed from where she was supposed to be doing the company's bidding that that doesn't convert it into a company act. And again, it's very significant from a liability standpoint. And even if you have adequate insurance, remember, if you take your insurance, use your insurance, you're going to get hit with higher insurance rates in the future. So that's why it's important to be careful and watch out how many people are doing. Intentional torts we talked about already. Usually an intentional tort does not create a liability for the principal. Having said that, again, if you create a circumstance where the person can commit the intentional tort, you're probably going to get tagged up for that. In talking about who you're responsible for, in the general theory here, as you see in the second bullet, is generally you're not supposed to be responsible for an independent contractor. Again, the problem is the shifting of the legal liability is, again, well, did you select this person carelessly? Example I might use is you hire a roofing company. I don't know anything about roofing. I know they're up very high, higher than I can go. So they're going to be up there fixing your roof. But if you hire a company, you don't make sure they have insurance, you don't check them out, and a passerby walks by on the sidewalk below and gets clunked with a big hunk of roofing material and gets hurt, then even though they're an independent contractor, they're under control, you own the premises, very likely to have a claim against you, not just the independent contractor. It's not fair, but again, it's part of the shifting responsibility that's happened. Any questions about that? Okay, we're going to switch.
Yeah,
yes, sir, go ahead.
The deviation from duty.
Yes.
In all your, in the banking scenario where the lady went across the street to get something to eat.
Yes.
So she was done with her duty, but is
because
the business, or is she on the clock because she works 9 to 5?
She's on the clock because she works 9 to 5, and if that had been dinner and not lunch, we could have constructed a different scenario.
Okay.
So in other words, lunchtime, she has gone out to, her purpose in the run was to go make the bank deposit. She makes a slight detour to pick up lunches for people. Suppose it's dinner time though, and she's picking up dinner for her family. So she drives on her way home, her purpose is to commute. Generally speaking, you're not as an employer liable for someone who's commuting. But the commute is on the path home, stop by the bank. I do this, frankly, frequently for my business. I make the bank runs. So I'm on the way to school, but I swing by and make the bank deposit on my way to the university. Okay. But for me, it doesn't make any difference because it's me, You know, I mean, I are the business. So what happens, though, is if you have an employee and they swing through the bank, but then they're commuting home, they're really no longer on the business of the company. So you might be able to argue from the business to the bank, they're on company business. Once they leave the bank, they are a mere commuter, and they're not in the premise or the business at that point. That's not even frolic or detour, they're just not on company business anymore. at all.
Okay.
So that's why I made the example lunch instead of dinner, because of that. Yes, sir?
What about business trips? I know of a case with ExxonMobil where they were sued because they were having people drive home. Like they'd go from Houston maybe to Dallas for a trip. They drive home at night from Dallas to Houston after they've done their business. Then they get killed in a car accident.
That's a very good example. The question is if you have people traveling out of town for business, even though that's sort of a commuting situation, out-of-town travel tends to be red circled because it's viewed that your entire out-of-town trip is part of your responsibility for your business. There's a secondary issue there, which is under wage hour, is whether someone on a company business trip is on the company dole, if they need to be paid for their hours worked and overtime. Generally speaking, they have to be paid for all hours worked, and a lot of the interpretations include the actual commuting time. But then, say they stay in a hotel overnight, their sleeping hours and their eating hours are not part of their work hours, but the rest is, and indeed, most likely workers' comp will cover them for the whole trip, other than when they're sleeping, and perhaps they go to a casino or nightclub. That's clearly not part of their responsibility that night. It's going to be considered like a meal. It's something beyond their work responsibilities. But out-of-town travel, definitely an area of concern. Very good question. Yeah, and that hits